Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pete McGonville. A couple of weeks ago, I ran some questions on my community tab asking you your opinions about us YouTubers. What did you like? What didn't you like? What were your opinions on some issues I see come up a lot? One thing I should say, this was not personal. I wasn't asking about myself. A lot of you seem to say, Pete, don't go changing. I've got no intention to. These questions were about YouTubers in general. Now, a lot of you provided excellent comments. I'm not going to go through the comments in detail. If people are interested in that, please go to the community tab of my channel and you can see those. I did notice something really odd about the comments, which I'll talk about later. There's really only one question where I will go to the comments themselves, and that's when I asked you just a free-form question for some ideas about what you'd like to see people talk about more. So with all of that said, let's get into it. Okay, so the first question was, really quickly, I won't read the whole thing, but essentially I wanted to know what your feelings were when a YouTuber does some kind of video saying that this new Glasuit Original is a Rolex killer, and then turns around and doesn't buy the Glasuit, but instead goes to buy the Rolex or has the Rolex. Or, you know, we see this a bit with Grand Seiko versus Rolex, Omega versus Rolex, where people say one thing but then buy another. And I see a lot of critical comment around that in comments to those videos and more generally. So I wanted to know what you guys felt. In short, 30% of you thought it was absolutely fine, that it was quite expected that someone doing a sort of as objective as they can review of a watch might find it superior to something else, but for personal reasons, very subjective reasons, they buy the lesser watch. On the other hand, about 16% of you thought that that made 0 sense, that people will only buy what they truly think is best, and that person has no credibility. Do the numbers, that adds up to 46%. Funnily enough, 54% of you really took a bit of a middle ground. You thought that, look, it's probably okay, but since we know YouTubers' collections, because most of them do state of the collection videos, we know that there's going to be a conflict there, and we should, the YouTuber in question should probably highlight why you see this difference. Where do I fit? Personally, I probably come in at somewhere between option 1, it's fine, doesn't need to be said, and option 3. The YouTuber in me that does these reviews, not very often, I don't do a lot of reviews, but who looks at watches, tries to look at a watch critically without making a personal purchasing decision, I see that routinely the watches that I'm sort of critiquing or maybe doing a hot take on are great and are often better than the watches I am personally have bought or will buy. So because I know that there's that my personal buying decision is very personal and very just me. But when I'm trying to do a hot take, I try and step back from that and think more broadly about what the market might want. So I'm very familiar with that difference. And so I'm probably inclined to tick off number 1, it's fine, I don't care. However, I read enough of the comments to know where you guys feel, and I might drift into that number 3 zone. I think that's probably, again, this split between my personal position and what the market wants. I'd probably tick option 3, not because I personally care, but I do understand that you do, and for a YouTuber, it would be smarter for them to address that difference. Okay, so question number 2 was around, did YouTubers have any kind of obligation to educate themselves and try and get things right when they talk about brands or watches. This split 3 ways, largely as I expected it to. The first group of people said no, YouTubers are entertainers, not journalists. They have no obligation to try and get it right. Just spouting their opinion, whatever it may be, as ill-informed or as well-informed, makes no difference. The general thought from these people seemed to be that it's all on the receiver to do additional research, form their own opinions, and decide whether that person has any credibility completely separately, and that the presenter, the talking head, had no obligations to try and get it right. About the same number of people took a middle of the road approach, saying that it's probably okay for someone to be a bit misinformed, a bit prejudiced, to not really bother doing a lot of research and getting things right, if it is absolutely clear that they are just joking, if they're just having a bit of fun, that this is not intended to be taken seriously. But by far the biggest group, twice as big as both of those others, was 50% of you that said no. As soon as you get on, put your ugly mug on television, as soon as you start trying to be an influencer, and that's what every single one of us is once we get on in front of camera, we have an obligation, moral if not legal, to at least try and get it right. And I've got to say, for me, I'm hard on that second option. I'm really hard over that if you get in this world, if you go to the trouble of creating a channel, of filming it, of putting your opinion out there, you have some kind of moral obligation to at least do some research and try and get it right. To those people who say no, the onus is on the reader, the reviewer, the listener to do their own independent research and figure it out, which, by the way, is a position that I think Jory has taken over at the Time Teller channel. I see too often that misinformation gets spread and reproduced and then become the accepted wisdom, so that if someone did try and do their own research, they would just bounce from misinformation to misinformation, with those prejudices and those misunderstandings just mutually reinforcing themselves, so that what was untrue now becomes unquestionably fact. That no, I don't accept that I, as a presenter, have no obligation to try and cut that shit out and get it right in the first place. I see too many mistakes become accepted wisdom, and then create an onus to disprove something which is clearly wrong. So no, I'm really quite hard over that. If you put yourself in front of a camera and take on the role of having an opinion publicly, you have an obligation to make that opinion have some merit, at some. Okay, question number 3. In short, did you think that YouTubers reviewing a watch should go in cold, look at a watch and just form their own opinions, or should they do some research, maybe watch other people's reviews, read other people's stuff, and then incorporate that into their thinking process? Really clear divide here. 65%, nearly 2/3 of you said no, you should go in cold. About 1/3 of you thought no, it's okay for people to do some research. The common answer for, I think, that most people that voted for that second one seem to be around the idea of you want people to form their own opinions, but at the same time, quite often there's controversy around a watch, or there's some conflict about how a watch can be understood. And how can you know that? How can you address that if you're not paying attention to what other people are saying? That's, by the way, very definitely the camp I fall in. I would vote for number 2. I think that YouTubers should be able to take in some information from others, understand where they're coming from, and then incorporate that into their own thinking to actually create better answers. I don't see this as some sort of university test, or worse, some sort of school test where we all do our own homework and then each put up, the best answer we could. I prefer to think of YouTube just generally as being at its best kind of collaborative, so that as each presenter sees what other presenters are doing, takes that, incorporates what they've seen into their own thinking, building on it, but at the same time always being careful not to be overly influenced. You, dear viewer, get the best, get a distillation of the best that we can be, rather than a dozen totally independent but all fairly mediocre views. For me, it's all about getting, at the end of the day, the best possible content out there. So that's why I'd vote for number 2. Okay, my fourth question, I thought I was going to get a polarized answer, but I did not expect this 19-to-1 division. The question was, when we're doing reviews as YouTubers, should we always just try and be positive, if that means perhaps only reviewing watches we like, or is there a room for us to be a bit negative, to say, here's a new thing and I don't like it? You voted 19-to-1, 95%. Let the negativity flow to 5%. No, stick to the rainbows and unicorns. Where do I go? Clearly, if you've watched my channel, I tend to be as negative as I am positive. I'm clearly with the 95% here. I'm definitely saying review everything, cast the net wide, and if you don't like it, just be clear about it. That's actually, by the way, one of my fundamental disagreements, and it's one of the things I really don't like about Hodinkee. The overwhelming, overweening, no dissent allowed, just continual stream of positivity. I just think that's really toxic. But yeah, I'm definitely with the 95 on this one. Okay, my fifth and final question was, are you guys generally happy with the content you get in the watch space? Or would you like to see something vastly different, or would you like to see something a little bit different? Again, the audience split into 3 roughly, I think, predictable categories. About 25% of you were absolutely happy. Everything's hunky-dory, you're good to go. About 25% of you thought, no, there are whole aspects of the hobby which aren't being covered. So the nice balance there, about as many hard no's as there were hard yeses. And unsurprisingly, about half of you were going, it's okay, but there's some tweaks we'd like to see. Where would I fit? I would, if I was signing up to this, I'd probably be on option number 2, the sort of category. I think there's a lot of great content out there. There's a lot of stuff I really like. But on the other hand, there's a lot of stuff I'd love to see us get away from. And there's also a lot of new stuff, better stuff I'd like to see us add. Run through some of the things that you guys said in the comments you would like to see that you don't think is being covered very well at the moment. Type B Flieger talks about something which I actually really agree with, and this is something I've been trying to do in some of my more recent critiques, which is step away from the spec sheets, because anyone can look those up. You don't need me or any other YouTuber to read you those off Google. And instead, trying to think more critically, more analytically, pass on the things that only we can do because we've got it in our hand, and potentially talk more about how a watch feels. And I think Type B's here talking at least as much about how it feels to wear emotionally as physically. Really tough to do, but I think you're actually onto something, Type B, there, and it is something I am actually trying to incorporate into some of my critiques. Martin S. Lauber came up with a few things I would personally love to see. Some of them I'm actually doing. This idea, for example, of my CEO for a day, a lot of people have really liked that one. Martin wants us to keep doing that one as well. Something he's brought up that I would love to see, and he touches on ID Guy who does this, is some more driving into how did the watch end up looking the way it did? What was the development program that got us there? Now, I would love to see brands get on the front foot and do that. If I was running a brand, if I was running any brand, that's something I would include in all of my product launches. I'd be showing some of the early sketches and the direction it took and how we got to the end. I think that's a really great resource that they have that they're just letting go. Martin also talks about wanting to see sort of more interviews with standard collectors that have less high-end, less wealth enthusiastic collections, and perhaps represented your average collector a bit more. Personally, I'd like to see that as well. That said, picking good collections, interesting collections, collections that represent good content is actually a challenge. I did a video a little while ago on what makes a good or bad collection. I got a lot of great feedback to that. I think I might make a video out of that. It's not going to be looking at someone's collections, but some individuals' collections, Martin. But the idea of what do I think makes good content in a collection is an interesting topic, and I think it's a video I'm going to cover soon. Disgruntled of London talks about not many watch YouTubers covering material from the 80s and 90s. Mate, I could not agree more with you. I think it would be great. Now, there was some discussion in the comments about why that's hard. And really, coverage of vintage watches, except for like the superstar ones where there's some sort of auction action going on, is really difficult. It's very hard to talk about older watches in the same way as so many reviewers have just dropped into this patter doing reviews of new watches. So I totally agree with you. I think we do need to find a way to talk about these older pieces in place of maybe a review. I've actually been toying with the idea of doing a vintage or classic watch appreciation video where you talk about why an older watch is good or bad, but without trying to do a product review kind of, and importing modern standards. I'm not really sure what that's going to look like yet, but yeah, totally agree. And it's something I would love to see and I'm thinking of doing. Okay, so that's it. That's what you said about us. Now, I said earlier I wasn't going to drag up too many comments, and I didn't. I really only brought up a very small number. There's a reason for that, and that is I was afraid it would be unrepresentative of the way you voted. What I found was almost across the board in every question, the negative was generally a relatively small part. On average, it would be like 25% of people thought that there was terrible watch content. 16% of people were hard over that a YouTuber that bought one thing and recommended another was a terrible person and had no credibility. Quite small percentages. But those people that gave a negative response, and as I said, often 10, 16, 20%, often made up 75, 80, 90% of the commenters. So by dragging out the comments, I kind of was misrepresenting the finding of the poll. So if you were one of those commenters and you were kind of disappointed not to see why I put, that I didn't put the comments up, that's kind of my thinking. My fear was that, as I said, the people who were feeling negative were much more energized about that feeling, were much more likely to make a comment, and therefore the comments were a little bit skewed. If you are interested in what people said, if you want to see how people got passionate in their negativity, I haven't got rid of the comments. Go to the community tab on my page and you'll see them there. So anyway, I've been Pete McConville. Like I said, this was not about me. I was talking about YouTubers in general. I'm not going to be changing my channel much at all. Okay, so I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watchers. Hope you enjoyed this sort of look into what you guys think about us YouTubers. One day I should poll my other YouTubers and tell you what we think of you. That would be odd. Okay, anyway, I'll see you later. Bye.